All right, everybody, here we are. All right, so this is really going to be probably the last major lesson that we're going to do with, like, again, blind deaf dog is running around. So if you see the camera jiggle, it's because of Falcor. Anyway, so this is really going to be pretty much the last real major lesson that we're going to have in philosophy before I'm handing it over to you guys to do your presentations and share your particular philosophies with us. Which, by the way, even though we're doing this distance learning thing, they are going to be shared with the rest of the class, and the rest of the class is going to have time to comment and ask questions about your particular presentation and your particular philosophy. So we're going to try to get it as close to interactive as we possibly can. But in the meantime, let's finish this up. So we've been talking about metaphysics, and as you guys remember from metaphysics, metaphysics is dealing with those higher questions that we don't necessarily have direct access to. Questions that can't necessarily be answered through scientific methodology. They can't necessarily be explained through following reasonable argument and that kind of thing. These are higher questions like, why are we here? What is the meaning of life? Where did the universe come from? Things along those lines. So these are the higher level questions that we kind of have to banter around, right? So that's what we're talking about with regard to metaphysics. And one of the things that we have to kind of ask ourselves is, human beings, as far back as we can think with regard to civilization, and even before civilization, we can kind of take a look at some of the records left by our Neolithic ancestors and see that we've been struggling with these questions for a long time, right? These metaphysical questions are kind of incorporated into who we are as human beings. I'll move this over here. There we go. All right, excellent. Who we are as human beings, right? In fact, as far as we know, human beings are the only species that really asks these kind of questions, these metaphysical questions. And one of the ways that we've done this historically, one of the ways that we've tried to answer these questions is through something called religion, all right? Now what exactly does this mean? So the very first thing that we have to figure out if we're trying to understand what a religion is, philosophically speaking, is what? The semantics. We need to know what a religion is. We have to answer the question, what exactly is a religion? And that's where it becomes a little bit difficult because, of course, in a Eurocentric society, we kind of have an understanding of religion as a belief in a God and a higher being. But that's not necessarily true in other religions, right? So exactly what makes somebody's belief about some of these higher order questions of the universe, what makes that a religion, right? Now, I may happen to believe, for instance, that, I'm just going to make something up, that I have a guardian angel who follows me around and helps keep me safe and helps give me advice, and if I'm opening to listening to what this guardian angel says, maybe things will go well for me, right? Now, I may believe that, I'm not saying I do believe that, but I may believe that, but does that necessarily make that a religious belief? And for my purposes, I'm going to say that no, that does not necessarily make it a religious belief. It may be a belief, it may even be a spiritual belief, but it is not necessarily a religious belief, all right? So what I want to do today is I want to kind of go over my approach when I'm talking about religion, exactly what exactly do I mean by a religion, and hopefully that'll help you answer some of the religion questions that you're going to have and deal with the religion project that I have in store for you this week, all right? So, also to understand, and like I try to always point out my particular biases and my particular approaches, remember I am a sociologist, so I am going to have more of a sociological understanding of these things than maybe you will or your parents will. If you asked your parents, because you have nothing else to do, you're stuck in the house with them, you ask your parents, hey, Mom, Dad, what is a religion? They may come up with a different answer for you, and that answer may actually be pretty good, maybe an adequate answer. This may be one of those areas where, some of the complicated stuff we talk about it becomes very difficult for your parents to deal with. But this is something that most of us have some kind of an experience with religion and what religion is, right? So maybe if one of your parents is a psychologist, they may approach religion from a psychological perspective. If maybe one of your parents is a minister, obviously they may come up with a different answer. But I'm gonna go over an answer that I think is adequate for our purposes, and you can make of it what you wish. Of course, the whole point of philosophy class is to get you to do your own thinking and coming up with your own definitions for some of these things. All right, but I think this one works. All right, so when it comes to religion, I want to say that in order for something to be a religion, it has to have two qualities, right? One is it has to answer sacred questions. It has to have a concept of the sacred, right? And exactly what do I mean by the sacred? All right. Well, the sacred is kind of well. First of all, to define the sacred is we it's what we believe. And it's not just what we believe, but it's a matter of otherworldly belief, right? That we believe that there's something in the universe that's greater than us that we can participate in, all right? And we don't necessarily have any data on that. We can't necessarily prove that, right? We just have a feeling that this is true. So this isn't a matter of proof, right? This isn't something we can test scientifically. This is a matter of faith. Okay? We believe it is true, and we are willing to accept that it is true without necessarily having firsthand proof. Now, this sacred, anytime you're thinking in terms of what constitutes what exactly do I mean by the sacred? Sacred is something that exists in contrast to the real world, right? So for our purposes, we say that it's a matter of the sacred versus the profane. Right? Sacred versus profane. So the sacred is these higher order, higher beliefs, right? This sense that there's some kind of a higher power beyond our understanding that influences us and shapes us, and if we can somehow tap into that higher power, we can be better people. We can improve our lives. We can go to heaven. We can achieve nirvana. We can be reincarnated into a higher form. There's a whole bunch of, we'll be more healthy. We'll be more wise. We may be wealthier, whatever. But if we can tap into this otherworldly thing, that's the sacred, right? Versus the profane. The profane is our everyday lives. Profane is the going to work, going to school, making money, our physical responses, the things that we see, the things that we directly experiences. The sacred can be tapped in through by the performance of some kind of rituals or practice, whereas the profane can be understood through scientific and through reasoned argument, right? So we can kind of take a look in those directions. So this means that we are seeing some kind of a differentiation between what we could call the divine world and what we can call, I'll put real world, I'll put that in quotes. All right, so we got a difference between the real world and the divine world, right? There's the world that we have to live in every day, and it's kind of a drag sometimes. But there's also this overlap between the divine world and the real world, right? So we've got this, let's just do a little Venn diagram, right? So we've got the divine world here, I'll put a D, and we can have, the real... Hey, whoa, it's okay, you're okay, girl, it's all right. I know, it's okay. There you go, good girl, it's okay. She got a little scared. And then we have the real world here, and this is where religion takes place, right? This is where religion takes place. This is where that divine world and the real world kind of overlap. You can kind of tap into a little bit of that. And maybe through that we can actually get into leave the real world behind and tap into the divine world. Come here, come here. Come here. You're going to see some shaking. That's okay. It's okay, girl. It's okay. It's okay. She can't see. That's okay. Good girl. Good girl. All right? So this is what we're talking about with regard to this. Now, understand, too, one of the things that we can kind of see with regard to religion is, well, how do you describe this divine world? How do we talk about this divine world? How do we get in touch with this divine world? And we have to understand that doing so requires us to make use of symbols. All right? So we come up with some kind of symbolism, right? There's some kind of symbolic things that we can use that can help us tap into this divine world. All right, maybe these could be prayers. They can be mantras. They could be talking to people that have that we recognize as being especially attuned to this divine world. They could be symbolic practices. They can be, in Roman Catholicism is very, very rich with symbolism. That's the religion that I have the most immediate experience with, having been born and raised Roman Catholic. Although I don't profess that religion anymore. But it's very, very rich symbolically. It's a very, very so we have the saints and icons that represent certain spiritual values to Roman Catholics. We have the idea of the Eucharist, right? Or the performance of sacraments. It's these symbolic things that are done and performed and recognized that kind of help us tap into the sacred. Alrighty? All right, but just like I said before, if I believe and I take on faith that I have a guardian angel who follows me around and gives me advice and helps to keep me safe, that's fine. I have this understanding that this angel comes from some sacred world, right? Some divine world, and I may even be able to symbolically represent this angel in some way. Maybe I have a picture of the angel, or I have some kind of angel. I have wings, and or whatever that help me to focus and remind myself that this angel is around. Does that make that a religion? For my purposes as a sociologist, I'm going to say no, it does not. Right? It makes it a belief, and maybe it even makes it a spiritual belief. But it's a personal spiritual belief, right? In order for something to be qualified as a religion, I got to get other people to actually believe it as well. I have to create some kind of a community, right? So in order for something to be a religion, there has to be a structural element to this, all right? And for our purposes, a structure has to do with how we practice. Okay, it's about what we do as a community. All right? I have to have people who believe in these guardian angels with me, right? And we have to kind of have a shared practice in how we experience these guardian angels, all right? So, for our purposes, this is how we practice. And what does this mean? Well, that means that structurally we have to have a number of people. I don't know exactly what the number would be, right? Could I convince somebody else of this guardian angel, and then if there's two of us, maybe that's a community? I think that's kind of murky, right? How many people constitutes an actual religion? I'm really not certain. There may be some legal frameworks. It would be interesting to see how that works out as far as legal recognition. I don't have an idea. Is it 1,000? Well, if it's 1,000, is it 999? I don't have a good answer for that. Right? But either way, let's just say it's enough to have a community of people who can interact with each other, right? So then what does that mean that we're going to do? Well, that means that how we're going to practice this belief, our understanding of the sacred, is through some kind of shared performance of rituals. All right? We're going to have rituals, and rituals are symbolic practices, basically. Okay, so that ties in a little bit with the sacred here. we're going to have these shared rituals that we all recognize as being special actions that tie us in with this, with the divine world, right? So we're going to have these shared rituals. We're probably going to have collective moral rules. Collective moral rules that we should be following, right? The Ten Commandments in Judeo-Christianity, the Eightfold Path in Buddhism. There's many of these. We can kind of look at these as collective moral rules. If you are a believer in this particular sacred belief, then what are some ways that you should show that, right? What are the actions that you can perform that will help you, that will designate you as this particular, as somebody who believes in this particular faith? We also probably recognize some kind of leadership. There's somebody out there, there are folks out there that we recognize as being specially attuned to the sacred who can help us to interpret the sacred. Am I spelling that correctly? Interpret? I don't know. Okay, Google, spell interpret.
Interpret is spelled
Yeah, that's good. Okay, thank you, Google.
I-T-R-E-T.
That's cool. Anyway, I did spell it correctly. That's awesome. So these are folks maybe in like Roman Catholicism, it's the priest or the bishops, and Roman Catholicism has a hierarchy, right? The Pope is the guy that helps us interpret all this stuff, and then that filters down to the cardinals and the bishops and the monsignors and the priests and that stuff. It all comes down. So there's a hierarchy, whereas many Protestant religions, they don't have that kind of a hierarchical. There is no one guy who necessarily interprets this stuff for us, but they do have ministers who we recognize as being especially trained to help us interpret the sacred and the divine from the real and that kind of thing. So, and different religions do this in very different ways, right? Oftentimes, too, there's some kind of what we call a canon, right? And this canon is basically some kind of a scripture. It's some kind of a scripture that we accept as being the word of the divine world, right? That we recognize as somehow somebody was able to tune into this divine world and they were able to write down what this divine world was like and what are the expectations of this particular divine world. And they put in the Judeo Jewish religion, the Torah, or the Bible in Christian religion, or the Tao Te Ching in Taoism, or the Bhagavad Gita, the Analects of Confucius. There's a lot of different scriptures here. Oftentimes we write this stuff down, and in the process of writing it down, those become what we call sacred writings. And interpreting those sacred writings becomes part of the religious practice. And also, many religions also have an understanding of sacred, what we call sacred places, right? So these sacred places, they may be, like in Christianity, churches or synagogues or mosques, right? They may be more personal, right? In fact, in Roman Catholicism, especially the Italian variation of Roman Catholicism, I remember there would be little memorials in the older people's houses for past relatives who had passed, and they would have little shrines in the houses for their particular patron saints. So my grandmother had a little place set up in the house that she lived in for Saint Anne, who was her patron saint, right? So there's that, or sacred, or like the Shinto religion or Taoism have sacred gardens and things like that. So these sacred places can be more personal. They don't necessarily have to be communal like churches and mosques and that kind of thing. But we do have this understanding of going to a particular place and either that place is naturally a sacred place, or some kind of a ritual was performed by which that particular place was cleansed and purified of real-world profane contaminants, if you will, and becomes a sacred place, right? So either way, these are the structures. So in order, as far as I'm concerned, in order to have a religion, you have to have some kind of combination of both. We have to have an understanding of the sacred, right, that is represented symbolically, and we have to have some kind of structures in place that allow a community of believers to practice, to put their practice of a shared belief into action, right? So I guess for our purposes, we can say that a religion is a shared belief system of the sacred that is put into practice through shared rituals and communal structures. I guess we can kind of put it in that way. Either way, these things, I think, have to be met in order for something to qualify as a religion. So now take that understanding of religion and apply that to understanding other religious beliefs. Now, one of the things that we can probably see here is that that religious beliefs can be really, really big, right? Take, for example, Christianity. Christianity has, 2-3 billion people who believe in some variation of Christianity, but not all Christians believe the same way, right? So then what we have under Christianity is we have denominations under Christianity. So you have Roman Catholicism, you have Eastern Orthodox, you have Russian Orthodox, you have Protestantism. But then not every Protestant believes the same thing. So you have sects within Protestantism, right? So you have Baptists, and you have Anglicans, and you have Presbyterians, you have Calvinists, right? So you have those kind of things breaking down a little bit further, and we can even get into even more. We can get into cults, right? Cults probably have fall into this line, but cults tend to be much smaller. They tend to be a lot tighter knit. And cults also tend to be, organized around a central figure. There's some charismatic figure who's holding that cult together, and oftentimes if that charismatic figure goes away, then the cult usually goes away. All right, so we can kind of break it down even further into that kind of thing. And there's an awful lot of people nowadays who they like this, but they're not particularly fond of this, this element here. So those are folks who identify themselves as, say, I hate to use in usually doing surveys, they say non-believers, but it's not that they don't have a belief. They have beliefs. It's just not necessarily a shared belief. They have their own personal. They define themselves in terms of being spiritual rather than religious, right? All right. Well, that kind of gives you an idea. They have this. They don't necessarily have that. And many of them are fine with that. Many of you have expressed in some of your journals that I've read that kind of an understanding. You have beliefs. You have beliefs in the sacred. But you don't necessarily follow the structure or the strictures of any particular religious belief. Some of you that I've read really have very strong religious beliefs on this end that kind of puts you in the religious category rather than the non-religious category. All right. Anyway, if you have any questions, email. Zoom, you could comment on Google Classroom, whatever it is that you need to do to clarify some of the things that we talked about today. All right, and that's about it. I'm going to go. My dog is now resting peacefully, so I'm going to go pet her and tell her she's a good girl. And I will talk to you later.